Performing CRUD Operations, Section 8. Services and Dependency Injection. In this section of the course, we'll create Angular services to communicate with the backend server and use Angular's built-in DI system to inject services to our application. Services are usually singleton objects that provide a well-defined purpose, and they usually include things that are not related to any component, such as values or functions or features that you want all components to have, but maybe don't have any efficient means to pass this data between these components and the hierarchy. Fortunately, Angular has its own DI system that provides these dependencies or services to all the components in the application by simply just injecting them directly to any component anywhere in the hierarchy. So that's pretty efficient. And since these services are all singleton objects, the information will always be fresh and accurate throughout the entire application, making our app flexible, efficient, and robust. So before we start creating these services, let's take a look at how they work behind the scenes so you have a better understanding of the concept. So in order for Angular to communicate with the backend or a remote server, we first need to create an Angular service, which is just a special class. In this diagram, I'm only showing you one service, okay, but you can have as many services as you need. And for our application, we only create one service class to provide the services to perform our basic CRUD operations. Okay, so Angular also has a class or a module called HTTP client module that allows us to make AJAX calls to the backend or to the database server. And then we can use the built-in DI system to provide these services in our app via a decorator called injectable. Okay, so we can do this in one of three ways. The first way is called root. That is to provide these services to the root module of the app. And this is the most common method and the one that we'll use in this course. This method allows all components and child modules in the app to access and consume these services. The second method is called any. This is typically used to provide the services directly to a feature or a child module. It's commonly used when you are lazy loading some modules, a feature we will not cover in this course. Lazy loading means just to load the module only when it's needed. So as a result, it could potentially increase the speed of the page load. And the third option is called platform. This is also uncommon, but if you have two or more Angular apps running at the same time on the same site, then you could provide these same services to those apps without having to replicate them. Again, we'll not cover this option in this course. And then when these services are ready to go and ready to be used, you can then simply inject them directly to any component that needs them. And then when a component wants to consume these services, it needs to subscribe to these services via a library called RxJS. Okay, so now we see the big picture of how services in DI work. Let's head over to the IDE and create a service class. Okay, so here in the IDE, you'll see that creating a service class is really simple. And of course, using the Angular CLI, you can do that very, very quickly. But first, let's go to the front end and to the app module. And we need to import a module called HTTP client module. Okay, so you can do that here, or you can just go down here and add it to the imports, and it should do that automatically, hopefully. HTTP client module. And let's see if we import that for us. I can say, nope, it doesn't. Okay, well, I'm going to copy this, and we just have to import it up here. Copy that. This will be from the Angular common and then HTTP. Okay, so we're from there. Okay, so make sure you have that added to your app module, the root module, so it'll work. We can close that now. Okay, so now let's go and create a service, and I will use a folder or a directory called services. Inside the services, we'll have a file called providers.services. Okay, so we'll do that using the CLI. So Control J to open your terminal and navigate to the front end mean stack. Okay, so to do that, we just use the shortcut ng and then space G and then S for service. The name of the service is going to be inside the services folder. And then the / the name of the service is just provider. Just like how you create components, right? And then Angular will automatically add the .services.ts for us. And we can also skip the test. Skip test. Okay, I think that's it. Let's hit enter and see what happens. You should create a file in the folder for us automatically. Great, there we go. Close that now, and in the service, you see that there is a provider.service.ts, and this is the class that we need. As you can see in the injectable decorator, it has a provider in, and inside here is root. We're using root. The other options are if you remove that, and if you put your cursor right inside the space here between the single quote and click the control space bar, you see those three options we mentioned in the slide. Okay, so we're using the root here because we're going to inject or provide this injectable service to the root component. Okay, so now we need to set an API. The API will be going to the back end. If you remember, in our app, we'll be communicating with the app that we created in section 6. So the back end here, if you remember, this app runs at port number 3000. Okay, so we need to set an API for that. So usually you don't want to put it here. You put your API or the endpoint in a separate file, either in the assets folder, or it's common to put inside the environments folder. So in here, open the environments. So we're going to do for both of them, because one is for production, one's for environment. And so here we'll create another property. Oops. I'll just call it API URL, and this can be assigned with the link to the HTTP localhost, and then port 3000, and then /API/providers. Okay, I believe that's the one that we need, and then put a slash at the end here. And that is the one that we need. If it's not correct later when we run, we'll always come back and check it out and fix it. So let's copy this same API URL and paste it over to the production as well. It just means that when you run this, by default, when you run it, we'll always run in the environment. Production is set to false. But when you run in the production mode, it's gonna use this instead. So just make sure we have the same URL here. Of course, when you're running a local test, you put a different URL. On the real server, maybe you have a different site, so you put it here. But for our example, we just have the same address, so we can close that now. And then here in the provider service file, we need to import that in here, and we'll create a variable here called API URL, the same URL, and we'll import that from the environment.API URL. Okay, so that is our API. This is the endpoint. Put it here. Endpoint to our app. Okay, Express app. Okay, as you can see, that is all we needed for this point. The services class is created. It's called provider service. So in the next video, we're going to create the get function to provide the get APIs for our application. In the next video, we'll create the get API to fetch data from the database server.